Hey everybody, this is Mace1370. I am joined by Zxarien. Say hello, Zxarien.
Hello.
And today we are going to be talking about all the different cards in the upcoming Dragon's Maze set. It's kind of awkwardly organized, so I think what we're going to do is go by color and then go by guild, and I think that will hit pretty much all the cards, and then maybe we'll throw the fused ones in at the end or something. So the first card that we're starting with is Boros Mastiff. It's a white common, colorless and a white mana creature 2/2 that has the Battalion ability. Whenever Boros Mastiff and at least two other creatures attack, it gains lifelink until end of turn. So I don't know, like going into this, I assume that the triple set is going to be, DGM is going to be, or DGR, I guess, yeah, DGR, is going to be slower than Gatecrash was by a good amount. So I don't know if like white, two drops are just going to be like the auto picks that they were in Gatecrash. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think the best comparison I always have is back to the core sets where you have, what was that vampire, the 2/1 lifelink?
Oh, yeah, Interloper?
No, the Interloper was in Innistrad. That was the 2/1 flyer.
Right.
But there's a 2/1 lifelink, and this is clearly worse than that because it has to have Battalion for it.
Right.
But it was all, even though the core sets tend to be pretty slow, that the lifelink ability is almost always relevant.
That's true.
And so I would draw the same conclusions here, where it's probably fairly relevant, and I'm sure there are going to be ways to make kind of the Boros Rakdos combination work pretty well as an aggressive deck.
That's true. So, I mean, I guess something we didn't outline in the beginning, we probably should have before we started talking about the cards, is like how we can rate these. I think like 1 to 5 is pretty reasonable, like 5 being like the best bomb ever, and then 1 being like stone cold unplayable. 4 being, like very high, I would like really look forward to first picking it. 3 being like a very solid card, wouldn't mind taking it like 3 to 5th even, and then 2 being kind of below that. Does that seem fine?
Sure.
So where would you pick Boros Mastiff?
I'd probably give it like a 2.5. I mean, it's probably almost always going to make your deck, but it's never something you're excited to take.
Exactly. I think that's kind of where I'm leaning towards as well. 2.5 for Boros Mastiff. It's official. Done. All right. So the next card is Hasta Snare Squad. This is a white creature, a 1/4 for 2 colorless and a white. Whenever it attacks, you may pay 1 white. If you do, tap target creature and opponent controls. So this is kind of an interesting card. It rewards being aggressive, but it's a defensive body, which is kind of strange. I guess that helps it survive attacks.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most immediate comparison that I would draw was that what's the 1 mana, 1 red, 1/1 goblin creature that makes it so something can't block? I mean, in limited anyways, when you tap something when you attack, all it's doing is making it so it can't block. It has very tertiary other benefits. And in that sense, it's a fairly aggressive card. But the problem is your 3-drop is a 1/4.
Exactly. Yeah, I could see this just kind of being a filler card for a more controlled deck that just wants a 1/4 body. Never a great pick for that type of deck, but it works if you have to take it. So I don't know. I think I could see myself giving this a 2.5 again. I don't think I'm going to be taking it too highly.
I'd probably actually give it a little less.
A little less, really?
Well, I mean, I guess the way I see it is, if you're in white and you're saying it's use in a control deck, you're either Azorius, or Orzhov, or Selesnya. And the only time that really fits in is going to be in an Orzhov deck. The other decks don't really want a 1/4.
Sure. Okay. So what are you giving it?
I'd probably give it a 2 or a 1.5.
Okay, so barely playable to maybe minimally playable. Okay, so this card, Lay of Decree, white sorcery, 1 and a white. Detain up to 2 target creatures your opponent controls. I guess maybe in a very aggressive deck you might want this, just to kind of like shut them out and get in for some damage at the very end of the game. But short of that, I don't see this card being great. I could see this maybe being like a 2 to a 2.5 in the right deck and like a 1 for other people.
Yeah, I think this card is going to be very situational. I mean, a lot of it comes down to how aggressive you are. But the problem I always had with Detain is if it works really well in a race because it kind of messes up their timing and their tempo.
Their expectations for what they're going to, curve is going to be like.
But I mean, at the same side, on the same token, if you end up like leaving their creatures back, then the next turn it kind of puts you on a bad lag. Because then they're going to have all their creatures untapped and ready to go, ready to block.
Right. Well, and the thing with Detain was it was always, I think, associated with a body, like in Return to Ravnica. So you were detaining something, but you were adding a body to the board. So it was a huge tempo swing when you played it.
Well, you had the one blue, one colorless in the first set that is detain and draw a card.
Oh, that's right, an action injunction. Yeah, you're
Right.
right. I forgot about that. I think this might be worse than that, just because you're not cycling. You're not getting.
Yeah, I would put this worse, just because detain 2 is, I don't know, I always felt that it was a little bit less relevant unless you're kind of alpha striking in.
Exactly. Like, what was the uncommon? It was the 2/2, and you could detain 2 creatures.
Right, it always seemed a little lackluster.
Exactly, yeah. Every so often, it would be a blowout, but like you said, usually lackluster. All right, so Maze Sentinel, 5 colorless, 1 white for a 3/6 vigilance, and multicolored creatures you control have vigilance. So I guess this is like the Sentinel cycle or the Maze cycle. This card seems a little slow. I mean, 6 mana for a 3/6 vigilance is not very exciting.
Yeah, this card seems horrible.
Yeah.
I hope to never play it, and I most likely will.
Yeah, I'm leaning 1.5.
Yeah, probably 1.5 or 1.
Yeah. I think it's, like, you put this card in your deck, a 3/6 does something. It blocks, it attacks okay. So it's not like stone cold unplayable like Urban Burgeoning or whatever that card was from Gatecrash, but
Sure.
yeah, you're pretty upset if this gets into your deck.
I mean, I guess I just feel like in a slow format, if this is your 6-drop, I think you're in trouble.
Yeah. True. Alright, so Renounce the Guilds, colorless and 1 white for an instant. Each player sacrifices a multicolored permanent. I could see this being okay. Multicolored permanents are going to be in everybody. Everyone's going to have at least one, right? So this will never be a blank. The awkward thing is if you have a bunch, then this becomes less good. And that in and of itself is awkward because the multicolored cards are usually the better cards. So I wouldn't really suggest like building around this.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this type of card is just begging to be abused, but it is certainly going to matter. It's certainly going to impact the way you play your cards and the order in which you play your cards. In the right deck, I think this is very solid, and I think it's probably almost always going to make your deck.
Yeah.
But at the same side, you're gonna have to play around, or rather, play with it in mind. So I'd probably give it a solid 3.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's kind of like Devour Flesh, but a little more specific, and you are always happy to put Devour Flesh in your deck. That said, if this format is a lot slower, maybe this card isn't that relevant. Just because with Devour Flesh, you were using it to, aggressively and take out their creatures early, and that's why it was so good. Maybe in a slower format, a Diabolic Edict is just not that great. I'm not sure. Well, I think we'll have to see, but I agree with the 3. Okay, so Riot Control, 2 colorless and a white. It's an instant. You gain 1 life for each creature your opponent controls. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to you this turn. I think this is a solid 1.
Yeah, or less.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not. It's very tertiarily playable, less due to its life gain ability, but more to its fog effect. On the same side, though, it's basically your token life gain card that is almost always filler.
Right. Yeah. I agree. Okay, onward. Okay, Scion of Videoghazi. 5 mana, 3 colorless and 2 white for a 4/4. When Scion of Videoghazi enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, put a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying onto the battlefield, then populate. Yeah, this guy seems pretty solid. 4/4 for 5 mana is a very reasonable body. The fact that you get a 1/1 white token out of the deal, with flying, is kind of gravy, and then you populate. So at the bare minimum, you're getting 6 total power for 5 mana. I'd say this is minimum 3.5, probably 4.
Yeah, I'd give it a 3.5. I mean, it's not. Well, actually, I could see it being a 3.5 or 4 because it's certainly something that's going to make you want to really be in Selesnya.
Exactly.
It's not great in any of the other guilds.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to make you want to have some sort of token stuff in your deck. I'm not super familiar with how the other guilds are going to interact with tokens once we get to 3. I'm sure there's all sorts of weird interactions that I haven't thought of yet between, Gatecrash and Return to Ravnica alone, not to mention the new set. But, I mean, yeah, just the fact that you get 6 power for 5 mana is good, and then, 2 of that is evasive.
Yeah.
So that seems like a pretty solid deal to me. Okay, Steeple Rock, 4 colorless and a white for a 3/1. This is a flying first striker. So 5 mana for a 3/1 is not the greatest, but it does have evasion and first strike, which is kind of nice. I could see this being like a 2.5 probably.
Yeah, I mean there are a ton of 5 drops, and so you're gonna have
There
to be
are.
very selective in which ones you want to play.
That's
However, I
true.
can see this working out fairly well in an Azorius Flyers deck, Azorius
Yeah,
Flyers Tempo.
right,
Although I'm not sure how much that's going to exist with the addition of Dragon's Maze, and
right.
particularly with the interaction with Gate Crash, where Azorius doesn't exist.
Yeah. Um, I mean, it's going to attack well, or I guess defend well as well against flyers. Like, it's going to interact well there. The question is, like, with 1 toughness, are there going to be a lot of easy ways to ping 1 toughness guys? I think that'll really impact the playability of this card. Um, I haven't seen a ton yet, but I haven't, done a full sweep through of the set, which is what we're doing now. Anyways. Okay, so Sunspire Gatekeepers, 3 colorless and a white for a 2/4. When Sunspire Gatekeepers enters the battlefield, if you control 2 or more gates, put a 2/2 White Knight token with Vigilance onto the battlefield. So 4 mana for a 2/4 body is not unheard of. I mean, there's usually some sort of bonus attached to that, like Reach and Giant Spider or something else. A 2/2 white token, I guess, is okay. If you have a lot of populate and you're really focused on making tokens, and you have the guild gates, then this guy's probably fine. I'm not like picking this guy super highly, I don't think. So I'm probably putting this at a 2, maybe a 2.5 in the right deck.
I think that's tough. I mean, I was always a little disappointed with the 2/2 white tokens. The vigilance
Yeah,
rarely seemed to impact the board, and
yeah,
you almost always would rather have a centaur token,
right.
especially in Selesnya.
Yeah,
So I don't know. I mean, it remains to be seen. I mean, I think gates are going to be fairly common, so it's certainly going to give you 4 power on the board, and it's fairly good in a defensive setup.
uh-huh.
But all in all, I think it's filler. I'd call it a 2.5.
You wouldn't even go down to 2.
Maybe a 2. I mean, it's going to depend on how it fills out. I mean, you have to remember that you're going to be taking Dragon's Maze first,
Right,
so you have to think on kind of how early in the pack you really want to be taking this card. And
right.
I would probably try to avoid it. So I guess you're
Yeah,
right. In that sense, probably actually closer to a 2.
yeah. Okay, Wake the Reflections, 1 white for a sorcery and populate. So not a very complicated card. I think this is again one of those things like if you're really going on the populate plan, then maybe it's worth taking. Um, so I'd say probably like a 1.5 or a 2 in the right deck. Like even in the populate deck, I don't think you're taking this super highly. So yeah, 1.5, 2 max.
Yeah, I'd give it actually probably a 1 or a 1.5, largely because it's sorcery speed.
That's true.
There were several instant speed populate effects in the first set, and
Right, root defenses, etc.
root more defenses, and there was the green one that fogged as well. And it was just
Uh,
they like despite them being slightly more expensive, they just seem so much better.
right. I mean, and then even a lot of like the Tristani's Judgment had populate and it was instant speed. You can do a lot of shenanigans with instant speed populate, and you won't really be able to do that with this. I guess it's cheap, but you're not playing it on turn 1, obviously, right? So maybe the
Yeah,
expense isn't that big of a deal.
the only time you're actually using it is if you end up being behind the curve. So, but it certainly competes with its other white guild, being Orzhov, in terms of keeping cheap mana up. But
Right.
at the same side, like the only reason you're playing this is if you play a big token, you want to immediately populate before they have a chance to do sorcery removal.
Yeah, or I mean, I guess maybe if you're like really curving out and you get like a 3/3 Centaur out early or something, and then you can get another one right away. That's not that exciting though. I don't know. I'd almost rather have a different card. So yeah, I think 1 to 1.5 is pretty reasonable for this. All right, on to the black cards. We're starting off with Bane Alley Blackguard. It's 1 colorless and a black for a 1/3. That's it. I am not super excited to play this guy. What was that? Incursion Specialist? 1/3 was pretty unexciting, and he had an ability that would occasionally make him useful. Just a 1/3 on its own is not very good. I give it like a 1.5.
Yeah, that sounds about right. There's not much to say about this card.
No, there's really not. Okay, Blood Scrivener? Scrivener? 1 colorless and a black for a 2/1. If you would draw a card while you have no cards in hand, instead draw 2 cards and lose 1 life. So this is a pseudo Bob, I guess. Seems pretty reasonable. I mean, like a 2/1 for 2 can maybe get a couple hits in the beginning of the game, And then if he sticks around and you dump your hand, you might draw a few cards off him. So that seems pretty good to me. I'd rate him a 3.5.
Yeah, I think this card's awesome. I think I'm gonna really enjoy the fact that it's not just your first draw step.
Right.
So if you have kind of what was that draw 4 discard 2 card?
Draw 4, discard 2. It wasn't careful consideration, was it?
No, well that also has the same effect, but I'm considering the one in Is It?
Thought Flare?
Thought Flare, right. If you use that, you'll actually draw
8.
And that'd be pretty gross.
That would be pretty gross. That's true, and you don't even need to... Well, it's if you draw a card when you have no cards in hand. So Thought Flare would have to be the last card in your hand when you did that.
Yes.
Interesting. Huh. Yeah, there could definitely be some fun combos with this guy. Do you agree with 3.5, or do you put him a little higher?
Probably a 3.5, but well, that being said, if the games are going long, you're going to get hellbent at some point, and if you end up starting to draw 2 cards a turn, you're just going to win.
He doesn't actually have hellbent.
No, if you get hellbent though.
Oh, you mean like no cards in hand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're drawing 2 cards a turn, and he survives.
Yeah.
You're basically just going to win.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I could see it slightly higher. I could see it as a 4.
Yeah. I think I'm going to hold 3.5 for now, and then we'll see how the format goes and what his interactions are. Crypt Incursion is 2 colorless and a black for an instant. Exile all creature cards from target player's graveyard. You gain 3 life for each card exiled this way. Not very good. Sideboard at best, so 1.5.
Yeah, at best.
You know, maybe you put this in against like the Dimir deck that has like a bunch of Death's Approach or whatever, but even then, not great.
Or against the Golgari deck for Scavenge.
For Scavenge. That would probably be a better use for it. Still not great though. Fatal Fumes, 3 colorless and a black for an instant. Target creature gets -4, -2 until end of turn. Yeah, this card's pretty sweet. I give it a 3.5. I mean, it's removal, it's instant speed. It can even double as like a combat trick if you don't have any 2 toughness creatures to kill.
It's a little expensive. I'd probably actually give it closer to a 3. I mean,
Really?
it is removal, but the fact that it only kills 2 toughness creatures unless you're doing it in combat, it makes it fairly lackluster to me.
It seems like in the previous sets there hasn't been that much removal. I guess Return to Ravnica had a good amount. Alright, yeah, so I could see it maybe... What did I give it, a 3.5? I could see it as a 3.
Like, it's going to make your cut, but I'd never be excited about it.
Yeah. Okay, we have Hired Torturer here. This is a 2 colorless and a black for a 2/3 defender. And he can be tapped for 4 mana, 3 black or 3 colorless and a black. Target opponent loses 2 life, then reveals a card at random from his or her hand. You know, so I mean, if the games are going long, being able to ping your opponent for 2 is not insignificant. There was that Time Spiral guy that you could like discard cards from your hand to like do the 2-point life swing dealio. I don't know if this will be as powerful as that, but being able to ping for 2 is pretty good.
The card you're referring to, it's Urborg Siphon Mage.
That's right.
Which I think part of the reason it was so valuable as well was the fact that you could do it multiple times in a turn because it was an active ability, not a tap ability.
Okay.
And the fact that it was a 4-point swing instead of a 2-point swing,
right.
all make it significantly better. I think this card's actually pretty terrible. I'd probably give it like if you really need a 3-drop, I'd give it a 2.
Okay.
But not much more than that.
I think I might inch it. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to just give a card a number without seeing like what you've taken before. Obviously, like I'm not first picking this card, but in a more control-y deck, a 2/3 body is going to be able to like stave off the initial onslaught pretty well, and then later in the game it'll get you some damage. So I could see 2.5 being reasonable. All right, here we have Maze Abomination, continuing the Maze cycle for 5 colors and a black. You get a 4/5 with Death Touch. And then multicolored creatures you control have Death Touch. So I think this is probably less good than the blue one. And like we said earlier, 6-drops are going to be, they're going to have to pass a high bar to like be highly rated. So I'm not excited about this guy. Are you?
I think he actually will work pretty well in Gruul. Particularly, I'm just always a big fan of the interaction between Death Touch and Trample.
Yeah.
But it's certainly going to be situational. A 4/5 body, I find it a little more relevant than I think the blue maze was 3/5, but granted it was a flyer.
Right.
4/5 seems a different class. It's a little bigger.
Right.
And but again, it is 6-drop, and you'll need to be selective. I wouldn't take it high. I'd probably give it a 2.5.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Pontiff of Blight. It definitely has a cool name. 4 colorless and 2 black for a 2/7 with extort, and other creatures you control have extort. That just seems bonkers. I love this guy. I give him a 4.
Yeah, this guy seems insane. If you have any sort of board presence, this is going to just wreck them.
Yeah.
Granted, it's your 6-drop, so you might not have many cards left, but if you consider your average board state, you have 3 or 4 creatures in play,
right,
and then all of a sudden you're draining them for 3 every single draw you have.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty gross. Yeah, do you agree with 4?
Yeah.
Yeah, solid 4. And the picture's amazing. Like this guy, I just want to have this guy on my team. Okay, so Rakdos Drake, 2 colorless and a black for a 1/2 flying creature with Unleash. This guy seems pretty sweet. I mean, a 2/3 flyer is a decent body. I mean, we all remember Sunspire Griffin and how much of a pain that thing was when you had a bunch of Vassal Souls on your board. So I think that this guy is going to work well in Rakdos just because he's one of those undercosted bodies. He does what Rakdos wants to do. I give him, and even, just as an aside for other decks, just a 2/3 flyer, even if he can't block, that's just a good evasive guy to get in damage with. I give this guy a solid 3.
I agree that he's a 3. I wouldn't necessarily call him undercosted. A 2/3 flyer for 3, as you mentioned, Sunspire Griffin.
Right.
Sunspire Griffin, unfortunately, is just an always better. The only difference is that it's double white instead of single colored.
Yeah, he's a little easier to cast, so undercosted is probably the wrong word. I mean, you're getting the drawback is, like you said, he can't block, but he is easier to cast than Sunspire Griffin. So yeah, I don't know. I could see myself looking forward to play this guy. So yeah, solid 3. All right, Sinister Possession. 1 black for an enchantment, enchant creature, and whenever enchanted creature attacks or blocks, its controller loses 2 life. I look forward to making the Sinister Possession Tainted Blight deck, where my opponent has the option to kill himself or not. So solid 0.
Yeah, this is basically unplayable.
Yeah, I'm glad we agree. Ubul Sar Gatekeepers. 3 colorless and a black. Oh, fail phone. All right, sorry about that. 1 sec. All right, so anyways, we have Ubul Sar Gatekeepers, the most difficult to pronounce of the Gatekeepers, for 3 colorless and 1 black for a 2/4. And if you have 2 gates, they give -2/-2 until end of turn to a creature when they come to play. That seems really sweet. I like that a lot. 3.5?
Yeah, it's definitely value. I'd put it on par with the blue Gatekeeper.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's very close. I just enjoy killing stuff more than I do drawing a card, although it's very close. But yeah, 3.5 I think is good for this guy.